Well, hello, everybody. Hopefully, you're enjoying your personal time with God this morning. Yesterday, we talked in the video about how never before in world history had all these nations that are written about in the book of Ezekiel develop any kind of alliance with one another uh, and formed it against Israel. And I gave you a teaser yesterday, but that seems to be changing as of world events today. And so, what I want to do with our video today is answer some of those questions I left you with yesterday, which is what are the evidences for the alliance of these nations today? And then, secondly, why do these nations decide to invade Israel? So, those are the two main objectives today with this video. So, first thing is what are the evidences for all those nations written about in Ezekiel? What is the evidences for that are happening today of that alliance being formed between all those nations? I think one of the big ones right at the top that you got to look at and think about is the fact that in Syria today, you have Russia, you have Turkey, and you have Iran all in the nation of Syria, which is just to Israel's north. As you know, Syria is on the northern border of Israel. That's the country that borders Israel right there. And they all have different reasons for being there. Syria, as you probably know, has been engaged in a civil war for many years now. And one of the reasons that Russia is there is because they have had political ties with Syria. They've been political allies going back to the year 1956. And then Turkey is there as well, and they have been permitted to be there because of some of their, I believe it was with the fight against ISIS and Kurdish forces, and some of the Turkish people believe that some of those Kurdish forces are actually some kind of a terrorist type of group, and so they feel threatened and want to protect their borders in Turkey. Turkey actually is right north of Syria. So Turkey has come down into Syria in the northeastern part of Syria to protect their position. And another theory could possibly be many people think that Recep Erdogan, the Turkish leader, they feel that his aspirations for Turkey are to restore the Ottoman Empire. So part of his expansion into Syria may have something to do with that as well. But Turkey is there in Syria. And then I said Iran is there as well. And Iran has several reasons for wanting to be in Syria. One is because obviously they hate Israel. We've heard that in the press over and over for years now. The Islamic government of Iran does not like Israel. Their former president back in the early 2000s, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, talked about wiping Israel off the face of the earth and off the map. So this gets them closer to Israel's border by being in Syria. And in fact, they are building a military base in Syria, which is quite interesting. And then also along with that, Iran is, their political aspirations for being there are really driven by their religious views. And so their Islamic religious views about what the end times are going to be from an Islamic Muslim perspective, Syria is tied into some of their teachings and the importance of being in Syria and some of the end time events that unfold in the Islamic view of the end times. So they look at this as a great opportunity for themselves, obviously, and so they are there. So all that to say is you have these three major players that are in the prophecy of Ezekiel, Turkey, Iran, and Russia. And it talks about how the invasion would come from the north. Well, Syria is right there, and you have all these nations assembled. You have these three nations assembled right there at the border. So also, these ties can get a little bit deeper between one another. Russia and Iran One of the reasons Iran is allowed to be in Syria is because of Russia being there, and Russia and Iran have had some military alliances over the last 20 years. Russia has helped build up and modernize Iran's military and has even gone so far to assist them monetarily in building nuclear reactors in Iran. So there's ties between Russia and Iran, and those go back decades. And then you have Libya. Libya is mentioned as well in Ezekiel's Table of Nations there about who will be involved in the invasion. What's really interesting about Libya is, if you recall, back in 2011, there was this thing called the Arab Spring happening over in North Africa and parts of the Middle East. And this is when Colonel Gaddafi was killed in this rebellion and overthrow, and things just became chaos in Libya. Well, today you have both Russia and Turkey involved in Libya. And Turkey has gone so far as to put their troops, some of their troops, within Libya. So kind of interesting how both of those nations, Russia and Turkey, have alliances and now are in Libya as well. And of course, Libya is also a Muslim nation. Sudan. Sudan was another one that was listed that we talked about yesterday. How do they fit into this? How does a North African nation south of Egypt fit into this picture? Well, Russia is, if you just investigate on Google, what is Russia's involvement in the Sudan, you'll get all kinds of information. And they've been involved in the Sudan for a number of years now. And also, Sudan has deep ties now with Russia, and so does Turkey. Turkey's been making inroads with the Sudan nation as well, with the Sudanese people. And again, people think that that's probably related to Erdogan's vision to have an Ottoman empire once again. So anyway, so you have all of those things coming together. And then, well, what about Magog and all those former Soviet satellite countries that we talked about yesterday? Well, one of the interesting things about them is that all those countries, historically have ties to Russia. Some people think that at one time they may have been a part of Russia's boundaries. So the other thing is that all those countries are also Islamic Muslim countries. So what are the two common denominators as you listen to all this of current world events? Well, one is Russia is pretty much involved in all of these nations in some way or another. And then the other thing is that all the nations listed here that we've been talking about, minus Russia, are Islamic nations. So those are two, I think, significant common denominators right there. Now, why do all these nations invade Israel? Well, one, I think there's some clues in the text that tell you, and this should be obvious too, just from listening to the news cycles on world events. But one is their hatred for Israel, and that a lot of these nations feel that Israel stands in the way of their religious or political ambitions, and so you have that as a motivating factor, and I think even the text itself gives some clues to that. But then the other thing that stands out in the text in Ezekiel 38, verses 12 and 13, really talks about how these nations desire to steal Israel's prosperity. In verse 12, it says that the reason that they are doing this is to seize, spoil, and carry off plunder. And then in verse 13, it talks about how they desire to carry away silver and gold, to take away livestock and goods. So again, what are those verses communicating of what these nations desire to do to Israel? It's to carry off plunder. It's to steal their prosperity. Couple of interesting things related to Israel's prosperity today. Back in 2006, the famous author Joel Rosenberg wrote a book called Epicenter, and in that book he wrote that Israel at that time in 2006, Israel had at that time 6,600 millionaires living in their nation whose total assets exceeded $24 billion. And of course, that was back in 2006. I'm sure it's probably higher now. Um, but then also another interesting thing about the land of Israel and some of the value there from its own resources is the resource of the Dead Sea itself. It's been estimated that the economic value of the mineral resources in the Dead Sea is worth trillions of dollars. And then lastly, in the last 20 years, there's been a discovery in Israel of a very large supply of oil and gas reserves. So these are just three things that I came across that speak to Israel's prosperity today, and what could be one of the motivating factors for the invasion of all these groups of nations into the land of Israel. So that's all for today. Hope this brings greater understanding to the passage for you, and we'll see you again tomorrow.